The call lineup here. So we're going to start with Sid in the UK. You're on with Tracie and Matt, and you are calling to discuss the moral implications of the Euthyphro dilemma. Correct? Sid?
Oh, hello?
Hey, there you are.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I had my phone muted. I didn't realize. I'm sorry.
We've all done that.
That's a polite thing. Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, okay. I feel like moral implications was poor wording. I basically wanted to ask, and I'm glad Matt was on the show because you know how you've heard like theists say that the Euthyphro dilemma is a false dilemma.
Yes.
You heard that, right?
Yes.
Well, I recently noticed that I have a bit of a problem, even though I've been kind of a follower. I have a problem with William Lane Craig talking about divine command theory, because he says the Euthyphro dilemma is a false dilemma, but then he talks about divine command theory, and I couldn't help but thinking that that is one of the prongs of the Euthyphro dilemma.
Yeah.
The one that says that something is good once God commands it. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much.
I would agree, by the way, that technically speaking, the Euthyphro dilemma could be viewed as a false dichotomy or a false dilemma, merely because the wording of the two prongs are such that it's not a direct negation of the other. I'm unaware of any additional option. And I think when you get to the core of what the Euthyphro dilemma is saying, I don't think there is actually a false dilemma there. I think it's a language thing. Okay. And I would agree with you that when Craig talks about divine command theory, that is functionally identical to something is moral because God says so.
Yeah, because I remember him talking about, I think it was the massacre of the Canaanites. Is that right?
They deserved it.
In the absence of a divine command, that would have been bad. But once God commanded it, it became
good.
Good. And I'm thinking that how can you believe that and then say the Euthyphro dilemma is false? It just seems like I can't get any believers to even talk about the Euthyphro dilemma. They always shrug it off and say, this has been answered so many times, so let's not talk about it. So I figured I'd just bite the bullet and ask you guys, because you're the only ones who seem to address it. So,
well, now you're listed on here as a theist. Are you a theist of some kind that doesn't ascribe to this?
Well, I am kind of a believer who is kind of struggling with it. That's the problem. I feel like I'm almost embarrassed to admit to this at my age, but I'm sort of one of those people who still believes, but I'm kind of afraid to challenge.
Well, you know what? I'm just going to I'm going to make your case for you here, because a lot of times you can have reasonable information in front of you and kind of see where it reasonably leads and still not shake a feeling. Right. And sometimes belief is based on a feeling, or something more gut level or visceral. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that that's just going to evaporate because you see that something's not reasonable about it. Just like a phobia. You can be afraid of something and understand that you suffer from a phobia, that it's not reasonable. It doesn't make your fear just disappear.
Yeah. The key is to recognize that the reason you're still in belief, or the reason that you have this phobia, is some sort of irrational or potentially irrational argument, essentially, that you can't quite put into words. And once you realize that, then it shifts the focus, which is, okay, I understand that on an intellectual level, perhaps belief in God isn't rational, and yet I can't shake this. And then you get to address why you can't shake it. Is it, does it feel good? Is it appealing? Is this notion that you're going to live forever appealing?
But that's something you can dive into yourself, in all kinds of areas, in forums or in further reading, or just in sitting and kind of thinking about, yourself and what motivates you. But it's still okay to say, I have these questions in the meantime, and there's these things that I'm seeing, and I want to talk to other people. Clearly, you've given, a noted theist an opportunity to respond to it in his own words, and you're basically saying, I've listened to what he has to say, and it's not satisfying to you.
Yeah, and can I just say, I recently learned the word, I think it's pronounced apeirophobia, which is a fear of eternity or eternal life or something like that.
Depends on if my relatives are there.
I did not know that word, but I
think it's pronounced that way. I'm sorry. It's basically it's something I've had pretty much since I was about 6 years old. The idea of living like forever in some kind of heaven was always kind of frightening to me. I didn't like the idea of living forever, but I just assumed it would happen. And now that I'm having like these thoughts that are kind of going against, like, you know, the authority, like God. Now I'm thinking heaven was a scary idea, but now I'm thinking what's even scarier than that is if I upset God and then he sends me somewhere else. That's what I know. This seems,
it's the better, worse option.
Irrational, but it's just. I'm glad that Jeff.
I wouldn't worry about it too much, Sid. I'll tell you why. So at one point, of course, I was a Christian, so I believed that I was going to live forever and go on to heaven. When I found my way out, I basically argued myself into the position that living forever would be a bad thing. Eventually, you know, you'd do everything there was to do, learn everything there is to learn, and it would just be boring. And so then I would argue that I want to live as long as I reasonably can with the option to end my existence when it's just dead-ass boring. And then later on I realized...
that sounds good to me.
Later on I realized that, first of all, you know, absent some sort of supernatural thing, we can't live forever because the universe is going to suffer heat death at some point. But the other thing was, I'd like that period of wanting to live as long as possible. I don't think it ever could get boring because we live in a dynamic universe. There's always something changing. There's new people being born. There's new things being learned. And you know, the notion that you could know everything about everything is kind of absurd. But what you might happen is you might know all that you want to know about.
Yeah, that's the thing. That whatever's changing or new, you might just be sitting there going, "Yeah, I just don't care anymore. I'm tired of the new."
Congratulations on your new baby. I hope it discovers something that I didn't know about. But I don't feel like waiting around for that to happen.
Right, but I mean, I guess the idea too is that thing that you've talked about, where in heaven you won't get bored because you won't be you.
Yeah.
Somehow it will be exciting. You'll wake up every day not remembering that is your 100 millionth day.
We were having a conversation about this. We have a guest in from the UK whose mother, unfortunately, is suffering from Alzheimer's, and I'm working on some videos about why are there psychopaths? You know, how does psychopathy fit into any God model? But it raised the question today while we were out there talking about it: how does Alzheimer's fit into that? And because at some point, my loved one is themselves in every conceivable way, and then they become less and less. I mean, we're all constantly changing, but I mean, this is a stark becoming less and less. They are losing their memories. They are forgetting things. All the things that go into making them who they are going away. Now, at some point, they'll die. And when they go to heaven, do they go to heaven as the person who's lost all their memory, or do they go to heaven having the memories that they had beforehand? And if it's the latter, then everything they did before in their life doesn't matter.
Yeah, one word though, soul.
Yeah.
Soul. Soul, that just clears it all up.
Boom. But the other thing is, if they go back to that other time, then that means that entire, let's say it's 15 years that they start gradually suffering from dementia, Alzheimer's, other things where they're no longer who they used to be. They don't have the same memories. What the fuck is that time for? How does that make sense in a God thing? If we're just going to reset you back to like the perfect version of you at 30, then doesn't that wipe out the intervening years? What was the reason? And I know apologists will say things like, well, this is the result of sin, so it's not really God's doing, or God's allowing this to happen so that you will learn something about the human mind and Alzheimer's and who you love. It's just an absurd way to avoid the obvious, which is that
this is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, that's exactly what.
I was only about 12 years old when I first read a book on like neuroscience and learned about how the brain is like what is basically responsible for consciousness, and that if our brain shuts down, then basically we switch off. And even at 12 years old, I kind of thought that was basically saying if we die, then that's it. We're out.
Do you?
I'm not.
Do you remember your dreams? Like when you wake up, do you remember your dreams?
Only sometimes. And what's even strange is sometimes I wake up and remember them, and then an hour later I don't remember them.
Oh, I think everyone's the same. If you remembered all your dreams, your brain would just explode. Like if you couldn't forget them, it would be
But
wild.
I very, very rarely remember. Like when I wake up, most of my life, not every night, but most of my life, if I go to sleep and I wake up, I have no way of knowing that I existed prior to that. The me of yesterday is the me of today. That I wasn't replaced by a doppelganger or a clone. That I wasn't dead in the intervening time. It's probably why Shakespeare wrote that line about sleep, those little slices of death, how I loathe thee.
Well, moment to moment, it's like you still have that whole, thought experiment of how do you know that all your memories aren't just like 1 second ago? So,
but there's an illusion.
Yeah,
from the time I go to sleep till I wake up, if I don't remember anything about that and I have no experience of that, there's no illusion. It's just this is a missing block of time.
Okay, but other people see.
I'm not really.
I put a camera in my bedroom.
Afraid of
live stream. Make sure you're still there.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sid.
No, I was going to say, I'm not really afraid of oblivion, nothing after death. So when I found that out, that may be true, I wasn't troubled. It's just that even after all these years since I found out that that's probably the truth, I still can't get over this fear of this irrational fear of what if. I mean, it was bad enough believing the Bible and the vague concept of afterlife in Christianity, but I read the Quran a few years ago, and that is very explicit about what happens to non-believers and people who believe the wrong thing. And I'm thinking, I know it seems crazy, like it's just something people made up to frighten people like me into conforming, but I just feel like you know what it's like. I know I'm embarrassed even talking about this.
I'm gonna say, if you haven't already, don't ever watch the Hellraiser series. Just my 2 cents.
Oh, I have, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I would say go do a quick Google search for the Apocalypse of Peter, which should be in the Bible but isn't because people found it distasteful. And that will put everything that you read in the Quran to shame because it's very explicit. It's the reason that we have Dante's Inferno and the various notions about levels and areas of hell where the homosexuals are throwing themselves off a mountain onto all the homosexuals below, squishing them, and then the bottom layer of the homosexuals have to crawl back out and climb all the way up to the top, and women are being taunted by their miscarried or aborted fetuses, and liars are being hung up on their tongue. You talk about graphic, but if you go back to the early 2nd century, I think the timing on that's right. The Apocalypse of Peter, along with the Shepherd of Hermas and other things, were considered to be scripture. They just weren't canonized. And so when they put together the list of canonical texts, they excluded those because people didn't like to read from them at services. When you die, you will, liars will have a spike driven through their tongue and you'll be hung there. And I was like, what if you're guilty of 12 different sins, roughly equally? So you're gay and you lied and you were a tax collector and, do you have to today I'm in fork hell and tomorrow I'm in mountain dive hell and the next day I'm in, swimming in the blood of all the people that I inadvertently killed. I don't know. It's weird.
Be in all the places.
Yeah. Also, could I ask a question? It's this whole idea about the logic of why hell or something like that, eternal damnation, is even necessary. People would say, sorry to invoke a cliche, but if people ask about Hitler, for instance, they say, "Oh, do you think Hitler should just get away with it then?" And I'm thinking to myself, well, surely if there's any kind of justice to be had, it's not really about what happens to the person who does the bad thing. It's about what happens for the victims.
Yes.
If someone's car gets stolen, it's not enough to punish the person who stole the car. The person whose car got stolen needs to get their car back or a new car or something.
Yep. The same thing applies with forgiveness. Forgiving that person doesn't get the victim another new car.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I always feel like, I know this may sound strange, but I don't care if Hitler is being punished or if he got away with it or anything, because nothing that ever happens to Hitler himself is ever going to change what he did.
Yep.
And I feel like no amount of punishment, or if we say it's hellfire and torture and that, no amount will ever be enough to really punish him for what he did. And people say, exactly, that's why it has to be eternal. And I say, no, that's why it's pointless in the first place. If no amount will ever be enough, then why bother? I mean, surely,
I really appreciate that sentiment. I just want to add that this has been a topic that I've been confronted with a lot lately, right? So I'm one of those people who was people can change and they can become better people, and I totally accept that. But as a result of that, I think some of the folks that I've talked to have come away with the idea that what I'm saying is that, all is forgiven, right? And that your past doesn't matter. And I'm like, no, you can regret your past and move forward trying to make recompense for what you've done, but it doesn't change what you did. And some of the things you did are bridges that have burned, and there is just no rebuilding that. And just because you become a better person, I can recognize the change in you and accept it and be glad that you have changed. It does not mean that you are now exonerated for all past wrongdoing.
Yeah, there's a really old quote, and I'm going to forget who it's from, so I'll just paraphrase it. But if I owe Tracie $5 and you forgive me, that does Tracie no good. And the same is true if I owe Tracie $5 and you decide to punish me. That does Tracie no good.
And
either.
I've been trying to explain to people that what has to happen is that the people who have been harmed are the ones who actually have to make the determination about whether the bridge is built again or never built again. And my job as an advocate is to support the people who make the decision about the bridge, not the person who has changed.
Although we end up going down that road when we talk about things like capital punishment, because we are prone as human beings to want vengeance because it gives an illusion of justice. It gives an illusion of a cease to the harm. I have a number of problems with death penalty. I'm not completely I fully recognize that there are probably people that I would be fine if they were killed.
There's a principle to it, and then there's the actual execution of it, and the actual, not to use a pun, but the actual execution of it in our justice system leaves so much to be desired that we probably should not be using it.
Especially when it does not do anything to benefit us. As Sid pointed out, it doesn't do anything to benefit us, and wrong. Yeah. So we're basically saying, why should we do this thing that doesn't help us at all, and we get it wrong?
All right. We probably
I was going to say, go on.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I used to be in favor of the death penalty before I ever really thought about it. And then I watched the movie Dead Man Walking, and that kind of put me on the fence. And then I saw the movie 12 Angry Men, and that pushed me over the other side. And now I'm completely against capital punishment. And it's not because I don't agree that there are some people who have just done such horrible things that I wouldn't care if they were executed.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's not really, some people apparently have been executed and then it's later been found out that they were innocent, and I think that's terrible.
Yes.
And I've watched debates about this. I think I even watched one with Christopher Hitchens when they were debating capital punishment, and some of the people who were in favor of capital punishment were saying, if you don't execute someone who's committed a murder, that's a violation of justice or whatever. And I just thought, not really. Like I say, it's about what happens to the victim, not the criminal. So the only real justice for a murder is unmurdering the victim. And of course, that's not possible. So I feel like in the case of a murder, there isn't really any kind of justice possible. So it's kind of a tricky situation.
Well, I'm kind of with Matt. When you have a person who has a high degree of potential recidivism, basically if this person gets out, they are probably going to murder more people, right? Like somebody like Ted Bundy, who when he did escape from jail, ended up killing a bunch more people, raping a bunch more, including a child. And it's just if this is all he could do, instead of saying, I need to get to Mexico and get away, his thought was, this is my last hurrah. If I'm going to murder people, I have to do it now before I get dragged in, for longer. That kind of person, I just think, that's a deadly threat to society, and it's not going to stop. And, it's not like somebody that's going to change, or, one day maybe we'll find a way to fix that, but we can't fix that right now. But the point is, since we don't apply the death penalty just to, solidly convicted, high recidivist, psychopath
I did it, damn it, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, and I'll do it again the moment I'm out of here, right? I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, that we don't apply it to this, but we apply it to so many other people who are not in that situation and for whom it is so questionable that it's kind of a moot point to me to argue about whether or not we should have it, because it's while we have our justice system how it is, no, we shouldn't have it. So I'm not going to, we can argue if you want about the principle of it, but it's kind of pointless because I'm already on the side of, we don't apply it fairly and justly. So,
and I know we kind of diverted from your, we kind of diverted a little bit from your point, Sid, but on the subject of movies that tie into the death penalty, while I realize that Kevin Spacey has done terrible things, it doesn't change the fact that he also made some good films. And there's a movie that you should consider watching called The Life of David Gale, which is kind of eye-opening on that. But.
So our short answer is that yes, the divine command theory ties into Euthyphro.
Yeah. Thank you for your Euthyphro question. The the existential angst regarding an afterlife and the death penalty, how else can we not help?
Well, no, you kind of have in a way, because you're the only people who I could get like to address. Like I started out with the Euthyphro dilemma. Everyone just, shrugs their shoulders and has a big huff and said, "Oh, this has been answered time and time again. Why are we bothering?" And so no one seems to want to talk about this anymore, except for atheists who agree that there's a problem here. So I figured I may as well just ask you guys.
It hasn't been answered. It's been it's just been skirted.
Well,
right?
it's the difference between having a fixed set of answers that are supposedly handed down from on high thousands of years ago and are unchanging, and people who are willing to consider new information, new evidence, and try to grow based on what we've learned in the intervening years. That's the difference.
Yeah, I did read one possible answer to it that said the divine command theory is not really, it doesn't make things like good or bad. It's about what's right and what's wrong. So
How's
in
that
the
different?
absence of a divine command. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. Basically, it seems to suggest that something was bad, but once God commanded it, it didn't become good. It became the right thing to do.
Oh, so the right thing to do is to be bad. God basically said it's the right thing to do is be bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, the right thing to do is the bad thing, and like the good thing is wrong. And I'm thinking, no, that doesn't seem to work either. So basically, I keep thinking, like, every time I think about this, I keep thinking like it's a load of crap. But I just wanted to ask as many other people as I could, just to make sure, like, to see if I'm right about this or if there's something that I'm missing. And
yeah, I not only agree. I've talked about this before, and one of the things when we're talking about morality and everything, we get into divine command theory. There is not a single objection to secular morality that is in any way solved by appealing to a religion. And the number of people who would say, "Oh, Matt, you're a situational, ethicist, so you think that all the factors of the situation go into determining whether or not an action is good or bad." And my answer is yes, that's correct. And by the way, so are you the second you say, when God says it, that makes it right. Because now the situation is God gave that instruction. You're considering a situation the same way I am. It's just that I'm not aware of God saying anything, or that if God said something, it makes it right.
yeah, and I'm the same. Like, when I think about, like, when people, like, apologists say that God is goodness itself, like, he is the good, like the paradigm of good, or whatever they say.
That's obviously false.
And I'm thinking, like, what does it mean in this context? What does good mean? And I know that sounds like a silly question, but you'll realize the validity of the question when they struggle to answer. Like, sorry to go back to William Lane Craig, but he says God is generous and kind and loving, and then I think, well, does that mean that those things are good, and that God is good because he has those attributes?
Right.
That
And does it mean that if I'm
good.
more generous, more kind, and more loving than God, am I then better than God?
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, does that mean that God is not the source of good? Those things are, and God is only good because he is.
Yep.
But then they say, oh, no, those things are only good because God is those things. So we're back to God as the nucleus of good.
Yeah.
So what does good mean? And it just seems to be a word. Like, the word good doesn't seem to really mean anything if you put the word objective in front of it, because it's like a subjective term, relatively applied, a relative term subjectively applied.
Yeah.
Sure.
Or worse, arbitrarily applied. But yeah.
Arbitrary. Yeah, I know.
Anyway.
It's like this. Yeah. I think maybe I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you for your
Well, we'll move on,
Sid.
but there's one thing. Don't beat yourself up too much about doubts and anxiety and everything else, because from this conversation, seems like you're relatively level-headed and struggling with the same things that most people I know would struggle with. So just
could I just
enjoying
ask
your
one
life.
more thing? I was going to ask one more thing. Is Jeff ever on your show still? Jeff D.
Yeah, not anymore.
He has time issues. Like, he's got stuff to do. he's not. There's no problem with Jeff being on or off the show.
Yeah.
He just made a decision that he had other things that he had to spend time with in his life. So
yeah. I was just going to say, because I mentioned hell a couple of times, and I know, as much as I like Jeff, I really do, but I know that hell is kind of his button. Anytime anyone mentions hell, he kind of goes crazy.
it's
and bites
hard
their
not
head
to
off,
think
so
of Jeff
don't worry.
when you hear hell. Yeah, I agree.
If you ever see him,
I don't really see him around that much.
I like him.
I mean, I'm friends with him on Facebook or something. I'm sure.
Yeah, he's active on Facebook.
Yeah.
I've seen him post. I haven't seen him in quite a while, but yeah, there's no issue with Jeff.
He's working on other projects. Yeah.
Same with Ashley and a number of other people.
Oh yeah, and Martin.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know Ashley from like about 15 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So
I don't know how the phone lines here work. If you like hang up on me, can I still listen to the rest of the show? Because I'd like to listen in.
You could probably just load it on YouTube, right? Like go to the YouTube channel. Yeah. And you can have access to the chat and to the rest of the show.
And even if we could do that,
will it be live?
Even if we could do that, putting you on hold, taking up a line for somebody else who's been dialing, trying to get in because all the lines are full is kind of unfair.
Yeah, just go to the YouTube channel for the Atheist Experience and then just pull the show up and you can watch live.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you very much. Both.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
All right, bye. Wow, that was a long one.
Euthyphro, Existential, Angst, Afterlives, Death Penalty, and Jeff D.
Yeah, there you go.
Welcome to the Atheist